Anyway, all right, so business to begin with. Number one, if you have not watched the video from Monday's class, I highly recommend it. I know I always do. But you have two pieces of homework this week, right? The first one, the source discussion on Courseden. There's some instructions there. But also, for the bulk of Monday's class, I actually walked them through what I meant by the homework, but even more importantly, how to do it. Like we kind of went through on the projector a couple strategies to on how to approach that homework. So especially if you're at all in the dark on what to do about that, you need to go watch that video. Good news, the video is only, 55 minutes, look at you, the master. But it's cut short because I had to kick them out because they didn't read. So it's a little trimmed, it's a little shorter, right? You save yourself some time. Anyway, that's the first homework assignment. I want to remind you about that. Second homework assignment, we're going to talk about that today. Working thesis, which we're actually going to talk about thesis statements next week. But working thesis, I feel like you have some idea of a thesis statement by 1102. And what we are focusing on today, a body paragraph. By the end of today, it's my goal to have you reasonably confident in your abilities to write me a body paragraph. That'll be due on turnitin.com. Okay? That brings me to my third bit of business, and then we're done with business. Turnitin.com. If you have not already, you need to sign up for our class, okay? I sent you an email over the weekend. It's in that thing called an inbox that you don't look at. You can probably find it by searching just for like Turnitin, one word, info, and my email should come up. But it has our class ID, which is a string of numbers, and the password, which is one word, man stuff. It's very silly. I thought it was pretty memorable. You use that to sign up for our class, and from then on, you should be able to access it, get to all the assignments. This is the first one. You need to do that. It's kind of important. Okay. Now, we can start class. To begin with, as I promised, and I know you guys are super hyped for this, we're going to talk about body paragraphs. You should know before we start, I have a particular way of talking about body paragraphs. Everybody has their own way. Also, is that on camera? Not really. Who knows if you can even see it. I use the 3 I's. Teacher you had before me may have used something different. For instance, there's the thing called the meal plan. There's other ones I forget. They all work pretty much the same way. They just have different names. Okay? Is anyone familiar with the 3 I's? Would you happen to know what they are?
Identify, illustrate, and
interpret. Yes. Now here's what's also important. If, after today, knowing these 3 I's specifically helps you when you build a body paragraph, awesome. I mean that, okay? But what's more important is what these pertain to, okay? And that's this. Okay. So every body paragraph, first of all, should start with a topic sentence. Is anyone familiar with that term? Does anybody know how a topic sentence is supposed to work? Yes?
it's supposed to be a general idea of what you're going to talk about in that paragraph.
Should be the main idea of that body paragraph. Yeah? So right from the top, every body paragraph, I should know to some extent what I'm about to see. Okay? Now also, we're writing thesis-driven, argument-driven papers. So then every body paragraph should probably do what? Should make an argument, should state a claim. Every topic sentence, especially if it is the main idea of your paragraph, which should be argumentative, should make an argument, right? Evidence. What is evidence in a paper? Usually.
Supporting details.
Yeah. And in this case, I mean, we're looking at poems, so like, what kind of evidence are we probably going to have? Textual evidence, like
Well,
quotations. Fun fact, quote is not a noun, but nobody cares. Yes. You pull quotations most often. That'll be our evidence. Specific textual evidence, 1 or 2 lines, something like that. And when you interpret that evidence, when you analyze that evidence, what that means, you are explaining to me how this evidence proves this idea. Okay? This is an idea you have to prove. Here's what you're showing me from the poem. And then the rest of the paragraph, however much that is, you walk me through the mental steps. Right? Because of this from the evidence, because of that line or that line break or this word, right, in the ways that we've practiced. Because of these things, it means this. Every body paragraph works that way. Okay? And if you can do that throughout a paper, you're probably going to do all right. Questions at this stage? Sweet. Okay. What we're going to do now is going to be a lot of fun. Oh, wait, I'm jumping ahead. Well, that's fine. It has to heat up. We're going to build a body paragraph today. I know. See, you are sarcastic. But before we do that, I feel like we got to at least ground ourselves in the poem a bit. Now, the bad news is Body and Soul is much too long for us to read in class. But, but we can summarize it. So, where do we start in this poem, Body and Soul? How do we open up?
I would say that, like, honestly, I have no clue where to start. Like, I want to say that, like, drinking.
Yeah? Who's drinking?
The father.
So it's a group of like fathers and sons hanging out. Other than drinking, what's going on? What are they doing? They're telling stories, right? So what happens over the course of this poem, you come to find out, is one of those stories. Interesting detail I want to highlight for you. What are they drinking? Bourbon and Coke. So a Jack and Coke. How are they drinking? Coffee mugs. And they're guzzling, which is, that's a hell of a way to drink Jack and Coke. But also out of coffee mugs, right? That, I'm not saying this first line specifically is necessarily something you're going to want to put in your paper. But I like to point out for you guys, especially at the top of class, that's a pretty significant detail, right? Like it would read differently if they're guzzling bourbon and Coke from like those glasses that like have designs etched into the side. They're like next to a fireplace. Like that's a different scene. It's a different kind of guy. Coffee mug is a particular kind of guy. So just pointing that out. You can learn a whole lot from like very, very little things. But we press on. They're telling these stories. We learn that they're going to tell a story about baseball. What kind of guys are these here in this first stanza?
Some in their 30s and 40s.
Grown men, it says. Their 30s and 40s. Where do they work?
In
Mines and oil rigs. What kind of work is that? We've talked about this. Blue collar work, so hard labor, dirty. A lot of those other associations, right, that we talked about. Seems like it's the same kind of guys, okay? We get to see a little bit of their home life as well. What do their home lives look like?
Not good.
Not good? Okay. Why do you say that?
It kind of reminds me of the other poem where they come home. It says little white rent houses return where their wives complain. So it kind of has the same like image returning as in the other one about football.
Martin's Ferry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Little white rent houses, their wives complaining about money and broken Kenmores, so broken appliances, right? And if you're constantly complaining about broken appliances, what does that suggest about those appliances and you? Huh?
They're broken.
Well,
They're old.
and you can't get them fixed. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so a sunny beginning, where we hear some things about these guys. But then we're back to the game, and they're 1 man short going into that next stanza. But they brought somebody. Who'd they bring? 15-year-old kid, right? They kind of size him up. It seems like, well, he seems like he could play, so let's play. And then they're warming up. You guys catch anything from that warm-up that stands out to you as maybe interesting? We're trying to warm up ourselves here, by the way. So it all begins, the men loosening up. Is there anything?
They're joking about the sex life.
What about that? Joking about the fat catcher's sex life. It's so bad last night he had to hump his wife, that sort of thing. I heard someone titter. It's a fancy word for laugh, quietly.
Well, like, that kind of makes me think of, like, how infidelity was kind of like a big thing when people kind of glorified it a little bit, that if you had a mistress, you were like a man's man.
Well, yeah, okay, so I thought you were headed down a bad path, but you saved it with glorify. So we're kind of saying, maybe, there's like this narrative around the kind of guy you should be or aspire to be, right? Versus the reality. Like, just so we're clear, like, I don't think anyone in this poem is suggesting that you should actually cheat on your wife, right? They're not saying that. But they're making a joke out of here, the fat catcher, that he had to have sex with his wife. Ha 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 ha. Right? And yeah, it ties into that weird sort of set of standards that we might have, right? Cool. We get that just from those lines. Great. We move through the warm-up, then we get into the game. The kid steps up for his first at bat. What happens? Here's a hint. It happens every time he comes up to bat.
It's well, I'm gonna say home run. But
Home run.
Oh, it is home run?
Every time he comes up. Every time. 5 times we learn by the end. Home run every time. Anyway, they keep throwing to him. He keeps hitting home runs. The 3rd time up, the line begins, we're still in the same stanza, as if this isn't enough. Something happens that 3rd time he comes up. What happens?
He bats left-handed.
He's a switch hitter. Son of a bitch. Yeah, and he homers again. Before he can do that, we learn a little bit about another one of our characters. He's a mean-faced man from Oak Harsh, the pitcher. He just doesn't give a shit anyway, it says. Why not? With your chest?
His wife ran.
His wife ran off, left him with a broken car.
And all
Sounds
the
like a
kids.
broken family. What'd you get?
With the car and all the kids.
Yeah. He looks at the fat catcher like he was the son of a bitch who ran off with his wife. He throws a fastball out of the dark green hell of forbidden fastballs, whatever that is. Sounds intense. But then, of course, it's still a home run. So they finish the game. Obviously, these guys lose. They learn later the boy's name. What is the boy's name? Mickey Mantle. We've talked about him a few times at this point. Who's Mickey Mantle?
Is that the really good Hall of Fame baseball player?
Really good Hall of Fame baseball player. He's kind of a big deal. Like, people will know who he is long after we're all gone. Yeah, that kind of guy. Okay. So, that's the end of the game. And then from there on, the speaker steps in. Like, there's a significant portion of the poem left after this, right? Pretty much all of that. After you learn that the boy's name is Mickey Mantle, the speaker's going to come in, and he's going to offer sort of his reading of the situation. He says those are the facts, but the facts are not the truth, for instance. We didn't really have time in my last class to talk about that, so we may not have time to talk about that today. But drawing a line between facts and truth, for one, is interesting, right? But it also kind of implies the speaker is going to offer us the truth of the situation, whatever that is. So you could say that the rest of the poem after that is his idea of, or his version of, what the truth is about this game, maybe even about these guys, whatever that means. Okay. That's the poem. Now what I want to do, I promised you guys, and we already said it's going to be a good time. We're going to try to write a body paragraph today. I like to start the process of building a paper with body paragraphs because I firmly believe that's actually how you should start. Like how you guys should start. I know most of your training says you should start with an introduction, you should start with a thesis statement. That's because most of your training is about writing in-class essays where you have no time to plan. We have time to plan. You start with body paragraphs, and we'll talk about why at some point. To start a body paragraph, what do you guys think you might need? First thing you gotta have if you're gonna start a body paragraph in one of these papers. You would think so, right? For the same reason, you guys think you need an introduction, you need a thesis to begin with. And again, I say no. At least 80% of the time, right? Sometimes you can be super organized, you can be super locked in, and you can get the thing done top to bottom. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, okay? But most of the time, and some of you will feel me on this, most of the time you have little to no idea. Is that fair? Yeah, that's natural. So how on earth would you come up with a topic sentence with no idea? It would be very difficult. I'm not saying you wouldn't cobble one together, but let's not sit here and pretend it's going to be great. Okay. So what you actually start with then is evidence. Evidence that, again, you may not have a great idea right now, but you got something, right? You know it's important. You know it means more than maybe just on the page. You feel like you could dig into it in some way. That's the kind of evidence we want to pull and see what we can come up with. So all that kind of laid at your feet now. Did you guys, I want to open the floor to you. Did you notice anything in the poem, either when we went through it just now or when you read it, whenever you read it before class, hopefully? These can be themes. These can be lines, which are even better. Anything you noticed kind of stood out to you as like, maybe there's something there. Take a second. See what you can find. Don't be afraid to consult your notes. That's a joke for me. You guys don't take notes.
You said just look for something you didn't really know.
Well, anything that stood out to you, yeah.
The Dodge.
The Dodge, okay.
About Dodge.
What about it?
It has a broken plug, and this belonged to the pitcher whose wife ran off 2 years ago
Yeah,
and left him with the 3 kids.
yeah.
It could be a symbol of like representing the Dodge representing his what's left of what he has, and the cracked block meaning like a broken home and a broken heart.
Be careful. Okay. I said this last class, and this is the first class where this is going to start. Occasionally, you guys will say something. Usually, it'll be in a paper. Where I will point this out. But occasionally, you'll say something in class that kind of sets off alarm bells in my head, because we're all different kinds of thinkers, and we're all different kinds of writers. And there's good and ill with both of those. Okay. So, like for me, I happen to know, because I've written enough, one of my big hiccups, one of my big hurdles, is I love introductory clauses and asides. You may have noticed this when I speak. I like speak in fucking asides. An aside is, you'll hear me do it about 20 times after this. You'll notice it. When I'm speaking, I'll start and be like, yeah, but also about this real quick. And then I'll come back. I do that all the time. But I know I do it. And you can't really, because if you try to do that as you speak, you'll go insane, right? So I don't do that. But when I'm writing, I know to look for it. And no one can read that for X amount, so I got to fix it. Your hurdle might be, and you're not going to be the only one who has this particular issue, symbols. We got to be real careful with symbols. And I put quotation marks around it because symbols are a thing. They do exist. But I worry sometimes some of you have been trained in such a way, like basically the way you're trying to use that cracked block, we can do a lot of work with it, and we will in like 2 seconds. But you also have to temper that a little bit. You can kind of stretch it a bit too far, okay? So to bring that back to what we're talking about, the cracked block, for instance, could maybe be like symbolic of the home or what have you. But my big question would be why? And you would have to be able to speak to that, right? Because I have another theory that might be easier to do, and that's what I mean by a stretch. Whenever you stretch too far, it can be too difficult or even impossible to prove. And what that means is, like, it's not a viable argument, right? I'm talking to you right now, but this is for everybody, because you're not going to be the only one who does that. But let's try it out. So the first thing we got to do is set up our quotation. Where are we going to start? And for those keeping score at home, we're like 2/3 of the way, 3/4 of the way through that second stanza, that big stanza. Again, you can almost argue this section starts with, as if this isn't enough, the next time up. Like that's how a line before all that starts. What are we gonna quote? Because what we want is a couple lines down, it's the rusted out Dodge with a cracked block. What do you think you guys want to quote from there?
Since he doesn't give it to it anyway because his wife ran off 2 years ago.
It would be nice to get to curse in a paper, wouldn't it? Let's see. Let me find where that is. Okay. Let's see. Can somebody read from the picture? Maybe I could do it. Mean-faced. How the hell do you spell harsh? Is that all we want? Nothing after that? Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. Okay. So there's our quotation. A couple notes before we go on. Can you guys see it okay in the back? You got young eyes, so okay. You'll notice at the end of every line, I do a backslash, space, backslash, space. That's to symbolize a line break, okay? When you cite lines of poetry, if it's more than one line, if you go over that line break, you got to tell the reader that you're doing that, okay? And that's what these are. And you do that specifically because, again, you won't always do this, but if you want to talk about a line break, which we do sometimes in this class, right? Then I, as a reader, need to know where it is. So that's what this is, right? So we have those, we have the quotation marks. What else do we need to, like if we're starting our paper, right? What else do we need for a quotation like this? Good. We need our parenthetical citation. What goes in there?
Last name, line number.
Good. Now, a couple things about that. Number one, you are right. When you cite poems, usually, in the parenthetical, you have the author's last name, which is Fairchild, and you have a line number. Now, this is important. This next thing I'm going to say. For this paper, okay, if you are writing about body and soul, or the poem we're reading for next time, which is Beauty, those are longer poems. I'm not going to ask you for line numbers for those poems. Imagine counting if you wanted to use something like from the very last stanza of this poem. Right? Yeesh. So I'm not going to ask you for line numbers for Body and Soul and Beauty. Now, if you write about old men playing basketball or little boy, right? Those are shorter. I want line numbers. I think you can do it. I think you can count those. Now, what does that look like? Say we're writing about old men playing basketball, and we do those 2 lines. That's what your citation would look like, okay? But again, for Body and Soul and for Beauty, they're longer. Last name is enough. That's fine for me, okay? Okay. So we have our quotation now. We have our quotation marks. We have our citation. We need one other thing, and it has to come before the quotation.
The title of the poem, probably.
No. Ideally, you would give that to me in the introduction.
Oh, yeah.
But fair enough. At some point, you better tell me what we're looking at. We're going to talk about that next time. But yes. But say we've got our introduction, we've got our thesis statement, we know what poem we're looking at. I'm talking about before this quotation.
Oh, like something for the.
Yes, but after that. Introduce the quotation. What are you talking about?
Like, you can't just drop it in there and just kind of be like, boom, this is just
Yeah.
crap from what I read. It has to be like, this thing, and this is the evidence, or like, this is the evidence, and this is the evidence.
Good.
Like, you have to explain it, you just can't be like there.
We need to, and I think you were saying, somebody was saying something like this already. That can help too. You guys are on different ends of the same. Okay, so basically what we're talking about, we need to set up each quotation with our own language. And the biggest reason you do that is because you want to provide context, right? So there's one thing we got to do before we can do that, but the reason you provide context is if we were to say, just drop this into the paper, it kind of comes out of nowhere most of the time. You want to help me as a reader understand what I'm about to see. And with a quotation like this, which I feel like is too long, we can actually just help ourselves. So I'm going to read it real quick. The picture, a tall, mean-faced man from Oak Harsh who just doesn't give a shit anyway because his wife ran off 2 years ago, leaving him with 3 little ones and a rusted-out Dodge with a cracked block. What are we most likely to focus on? What seems most significant out of this quotation? What do we want to make sure we keep?
Picture.
Okay, like the word, the picture?
Or you're talking about the picture.
We are. The wife running off would be hard to lose, right? Yeah, that seems important. What else seems most important? I mean, we started this whole conversation with one particular detail. The Dodge, the block, okay. So it seems like we really want that last line, definitely. Okay. I would like to get this down to 2 lines, 3 lines at most. And it seems like we at least want some of that.
We don't need to describe the picture.
Well, here's the other test. Here's the other test. Whenever possible, you only want to quote for language rather than ideas. So what does that mean? You pointed out that it could be important that he is the pitcher, and I agree, but that's an idea, right? When you quote for language, what that means is you quote for something that you can't say in your own words and convey it the same way.
So maybe start at the who just doesn't and then continue.
Exactly. Because some of you are censoring yourselves, which is very cute, no hate. But like, who doesn't give a shit anyway? We could phrase that, he doesn't care. But that doesn't mean the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, you want to go? I don't care. Hey, do you want to go? I don't give a shit. That reads differently.
Yeah.
So it's hard, it's almost impossible, if we want to talk about that, to paraphrase it. Which means we probably want to quote it. Okay, but what we've kind of started to figure out is, we said we wanted, most if not all of that. Seems like we want some of that. That means the rest of it, we could probably lose. All right. Now the good news when you do something like that, most often is that that can be our context. So how do we paraphrase what we just lost? We said he's a tall pitcher from Oak Harsh, which is just some other town in Oklahoma, I think. And then the rest of it. How do we say that in our own words?
The tall pitcher who?
Well, let's set up the scene a little bit. This is the third home run, which may or may not matter ultimately. But why are we talking about this scene? We're talking about the pitcher. What else is going on?
He comes up to hit left-handed this time.
Yeah. How does the pitcher seem to feel about that?
You can't believe them. So what they says they can't believe.
And he's maybe a little upset. We find out later because he throws that demon fastball or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Is home run one word? It is 2 words. Right? Something like that. It's a little clunky, again, because I love asides, but that's kind of our scene. We're talking about the speaker and what he's describing, which is ultimately what we're going to look at. And then we're kind of into the quotation, right? I mean, if you want to, just, again, to make it a little simpler, if you wanted to start at the pitcher, cut the rest off, you could. The pitcher, incredulous at man's decisions which sides of the plate, is a man who, and then you're still into it just as well, right? But what have we done? We've done 2 things. Number 1, again, we've set up the quotation. So when I get there as a reader, I'm prepared for what I'm going to see, right? I understand where we're headed. Number 2, we've started to set up our argument. We point out that we're talking about the pitcher, but we also say that he's upset at Mantle. So that kind of colors the quotation when we get there, right? That kind of leads me as a reader to say, oh, he's not just upset about this stuff, he's also upset at Mantle. The two are tangled together some kind of way. And I might talk about that if I'm so inclined. Okay, so that's our quotation. Now, we still don't do the topic sentence because we still don't know what we necessarily want to say about this. What elements are we going to talk about? We mentioned already what some of the prime candidates are, right? Not giving a shit anyway. The wife ran off 2 years ago with the 3 little ones. And the rusted out Dodge with the cracked block. We started this with the cracked block, so it seems like, at least to begin with, we should talk about that. I cautioned you saying that like it's absolutely about his home or whatever. Could be a stretch. What led you to say that, though? Why do you feel like that could be the case?
A car is like, especially nowadays, a car is like a really big part of a family, right? So there's like,
Why?
because a car is a really big part of the family because you basically need one for everything that you do anymore, basically. And like
Maybe. All right, real quick. We have to be careful with assumptions now, because you're talking a lot about now, right, versus in the poem, which is like much earlier.
right,
And we know something important about this car. What's the important thing we know about this car?
it's got a cracked block.
No, I'm not a mechanic. Does anybody here know at least a little bit about cars? If it has a cracked block, what else do we know about the car? It doesn't run. Okay. So my point is, to a certain extent, what you're saying, yes. But on the other hand, given what we get from the poem,
I'm going too far with it.
well, because of this, we know in some ways this guy can make it work without a car because he does not have one. You see what I'm saying? So but okay. I agree to a point. And the thing that's interesting, you started with, I'm paraphrasing what you said. You said something like, having a car is like, you didn't say it like this, but you said it's like part of the family or something almost. Why? One reason is what you started to talk about, which is, well, these days, and that's true for us now, but I think it's older than that, if we're going to make that argument for you, and I think we can. Why is a car part of the family, in a way? Like, that's weird, right?
Be careful. Make sure it runs and stuff. Make sure it has gas.
Yeah.
Well, families go together places in cars.
Okay.
So,
Like where?
Like Walmart, the park, Disneyland,
Uh-huh.
laundromat, wherever.
So all aspects of your life,
Yeah.
in some way, shape, or form, all aspects of your family life are tied to that car, in some ways defined by that car, because now that it's broken, your ass is walking everywhere. Your family life is different. Okay. So we have the germ of an idea here, and what we're about to do is test out whether or not we can make it work. Spoilers, I happen to think we can, but you don't always know that. You got to kind of play out the thread to find out. So Jesus. Percher? We can get to some of that stuff about the Dodge being a part of the family, but we got to fill in a gap. We have to explain how we get to that idea from the poem itself. As best you can, you always have to start with the poem itself before you... What's up?
Are you on interpreting?
Yes. All we're doing now is we're trying to begin analysis. We don't know what idea we're after specifically. That's the point I'm trying to make. Hopefully we're going to end up there. But right now we're kind of in the interpretive stage where we're not quite sure what we want to say. Okay? But our kind of idea is this has something to do with the family. The car is somehow symbolic of, attached to the family. And we made some points for how we could do that outside of the poem. Walmart, Disneyland, all that stuff, right? Yes. Before we can start doing that, though, we've got to come from the poem itself. Is there anything in this quotation where we can argue the Dodge is a part of that family? Sure.
Well, because it talks about his wife ran off, leaving him with the kids and the Dodge.
It's a part of the inventory.
The rest of the family.
What you're linguistically, we make the Dodge with the crack block a part of the family, along with leaving him with 3 little ones and the Dodge with the crack block. Or I basically got that. Yeah, that's an argument, and we're working to prove it now with the evidence, right? Cool. Okay. So it stands as a broken home. Pitcher will return to after the game. Primarily, right? So right now, we're saying, before I get to why that idea matters or what else I have to say about it, I have pointed to the evidence, 2 specific sort of moments in those lines, and said they indicate this. A quick side note. I told you I'd do that a lot. This is not the only argument we could make with these lines. We can make other arguments, almost always. One sign of a good argument is that you could make different ones. I'm not saying they would necessarily counter this one, but sometimes they will. All I'm saying is this is an argument, not necessarily the argument. And that's an important distinction. That said, we're saying the Dodge is part of the family. Okay. So what? We got sort of 2 roads we can go down at this point. The first is there anything more to say about the Dodge being part of the family? And there might be, because we kind of started to do some stuff. The other road is, why does that matter? Why do we care? Why are you telling me about it in this paragraph, right? Let's start with the first one. Why else is this car a part of the family? How are we thinking about maybe defining that?
I'm just wondering, like, they say he doesn't give a shit, is it because, is he, like, happy with it, or is he not happy with it? Because it doesn't really specify how he feels about being left with 3 kids.
Okay, well, let's start there. That's good. I like that. What does it mean when you say you don't give a shit?
It's whatever.
So you're apathetic,
Yeah.
right? That's the fancy way of talking about not giving a shit. Apathy. Well, maybe. Now, here's my question about that. I think sometimes when you say you don't give a shit, maybe you really mean that, and you really are apathetic. But I think a lot of the time, I'll put it to you this way. Like, if somebody asked the pitcher, hey man, what do you think about your wife running off, leaving you with those kids in that broken car? And he's like, I don't give a shit. Does he really not care? No. What's he saying when he says that?
I don't want to like talk about it. I don't really want to think about it.
I don't want to think about it. Which is the opposite of apathy in some way, right? You care so much that you want to not think about it because that would somehow affect you, right? Yeah. So we can absolutely talk about that. And again, how do we do that? We're talking about the phrasing. It would be different if, like, as a man who just didn't care, right? It doesn't have the same heat to the language. I'm saying he doesn't give a shit anyway, right? Reads differently. It means something more than that. Cursing is great. You should try it. No. Anyway, so, okay. Why? Why is it telling us that he doesn't give a shit anyway? Why does that tell us that he does, do you think?
Because it didn't go into any further discussion about it.
We can start there. Sorry, I'm trying to do this in real time, so this is difficult. So he doesn't tell us any more of the pitcher's thoughts. Why does that matter? Do you think?
Because the pitcher doesn't have any more thoughts, because he's actively not thinking about it.
Okay. Yeah. What does cursing do there? We kind of talked about this, but we got to put it in a sentence now.
Okay, but it's like emphasis of like how. Okay, I don't know how to explain this.
It's got
Try.
that
We're just
heat
trying.
to it.
What's up?
It's got the heat to it.
Okay.
Like whenever, I don't know, I cuss. And when I cuss, it's like sometimes it's like I can't find a word that has enough aggression to explain what I want to get at, so then I cuss.
It's about emphasis.
Raw emotion.
Yeah. So this is what's great too. We just said, because one thing we have to kind of combat is the literal definition of that phrase, right? I don't give a shit. And you guys all say, well, it means you don't care. It means apathy. It does in certain contexts. But in this context, to say it like that means just the opposite, right? And some of that is due to the emphasis. It indicates emotion that we're ignoring. Okay. I've used illustrate already. I know it doesn't matter, but it matters to me. Oh God. By the courage which action. What's that, huh?
Display.
Indicate,
Oh, you guys love display.
indicates.
I'll go with indicate. That's a safe one. Okay. By the courage which actually indicates. Indicates the raw emotion the pitcher works to ignore. Something like that. Okay. So what have we done? First of all, for those, again, keeping score at home, you notice how focusing on very specific details, some would say minute details, gave us a whole bunch of words. And I also know, and I'll say this throughout the semester, I write differently from you. Don't think you have to write like me. You write how you write, I write how I write. Okay? But if you focus on details, I promise you, you have more to say. If you ever catch yourself working on one of these papers like, I don't know what else, what am I going to say, what am I going to do? Go look at some details. That's why I ask you for 3 pages, because I want you to focus on details. We've talked about shit and a cracked block, and that's all that. And we have more to do, actually. For instance, we still have to figure out why any of this matters. And I think we can, hopefully. What time is it? Oh, yeah, we got time. So the threads we have right now are basically the Dodge, and again, we took all this from the poem. The Dodge is somehow not just synonymous with, symbolic of the family. We took it a step further and said it's part of the family. Some of you know people like this, by the way. My dad has a Buick. I remember going to daycare in it. It's a piece of shit. He loves that car. Like he loves that car. It's a part of the family. So everything we've just said about the pitcher's opinion of his family, how apparently he's trying to like not think about it as much, and for reasons that we could, kind of understand. It does sound rough. The Dodge is a part of that. So what? The big question we always have to answer by the end of every body paragraph. So what? Why does this matter? Why should we care, number one, about what's happening to this pitcher? Okay. More specifically, what can we learn by the fact that not just that his family is sort of screwed up right now, which again is obvious. That's not a claim worth making. But that the Dodge somehow helps us understand that. Why the Dodge? That's the question. We keep saying car. Honestly, I keep envisioning a truck.
Yeah.
Me too.
Okay, good. Why? Why a truck?
Just seems fitting.
Why? I'm not disagreeing, but
It's
like,
the
Well, they're all
baseball.
described as like hard and
family
rugged, and they play baseball all the time.
It's a
So
man.
whenever you think of a man, right?
okay.
It's like truck.
So given everything we know about this guy, the kind of guy he is, the job he has, the world he's from, it would suggest a truck. Probably. That may or may not sneak its way into our paragraph, but just, I want us all on the same page. Well, then that reads differently from a car. You said it's a family car. I don't know about that. A family car is like an SUV or something, right? Like a,
Family
Like
truck.
a caravan.
yeah. That reads differently from a truck. What is a truck? Like what's different about it?
A truck is more of a work vehicle than a.
Good.
Than
Then family.
a out in the town vehicle.
Okay.
But it could still be a family truck
It
at the same
can.
time. Because it's like if you need, like, let's say you're buying furniture, you can't put it on your Civic, so you gotta have a pickup truck.
So what are we saying? A truck is more about what?
Utility.
Transportation.
Very good word. That's the word I was going to use. Get out of my head.
Reading your head.
Be careful. I'm dark up here, man. All right. Yeah. That's really interesting too. That's a really ugly sentence. And again, we're just trying to make this work. So now we've said that the truck, we're all assuming, and again, I think it's a fair assumption. That's a pretty fair. That's a bit of a stretch, but it's a fair one. Is a part of the family, and more than that, it's about utility. It's not a caravan or a minivan or an SUV or back in the day like a station wagon, if you know what that is. It's not one of those. Those have different uses. And this truck is about utility. And the other important thing we know about the truck is what?
It's got a broken block.
Broken. Most likely, again, this is a bit of an assumption, but most likely, whose truck is it? The pitcher's. And I kind of imply it in this sentence, because it seems like where we're headed. If the truck is about utility, and is broken, and the truck is his, he's useless in some way. His utility is broken. Now here's the million-dollar question. Pardon the pun, that it seems like we're driving at. What is his use? Not in the poem. We have to be as specific as we can. In this paragraph, what are we talking about? And can we sort out in what way this guy is broken? What use of his is broken?
He's got a broken heart.
He seems like a loser.
Easy. I mean, sure.
Almost immediately, he's like, this kid who just kind of walked up into his baseball field is like hitting home runs
Mhm.
all the time. And this pitcher, like, you know, presumably has probably been doing it a little longer.
Sure. All right. We'll do this. One idea we got to kind of deal with, and we're not going to have time to add to this in a big way, but we have big picture sort of concerns, right, outside of this paragraph. One of them is the very real problem, not just the pitcher has, but all these guys have with mantle. You get it in the last part of the poem. The speaker says there, I want to get it right for you. Oh, they probably even talk about the Dodge here. I know that this man with the half-orphaned children, this is how the poem ends, and worthless Dodge has also encountered for his first and possibly only time the vast gap between talent and genius. There's a gap, a vast one, between Mantle and these guys. So Mantle has something these guys don't. Now, what you'd have to be careful about, you'll notice our paragraph is already getting quite long. We don't have time to talk about that in this paragraph, but we probably should. So, first you got to learn to type, and then that's a later concern maybe. Maybe that's something we get to in another paragraph. What we're talking about here, what that has to do with that, remains to be seen. But that's like a big picture thing. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it, but we can't talk about it right now. Okay. So back to our original sort of screed. The Dodge is a part of the family. It's also about utility. It's also the pitcher's Dodge, his truck. Okay? It's a broken utility. Now, I hate to put it this way, because you said he has a broken heart, and I'm not disagreeing with that either. But what use is a heart? We're talking about utility, right? A ladder has great utility.
It just seems like he doesn't have any, he can't work because he doesn't have his truck. He's just walking around.
So what can't he?
He can't really do anything.
He can't.
So,
That's why he's
useless is
scared.
what? Useless is what?
A dad.
Yes. Man, we just shit on that guy. Yes. Well, that implies it's his fault. I don't know if it's his fault. Okay. He's a failure. He's lost his utility. Rough. But what we just argued, right? That's an argument we've made. Given what we say about the truck and everything, all the kind of threads, again, we had to lay out a little bit. We had to kind of work our way through some of them, right? Both on the page and off. Given that, we arrived at the claim that he's somehow a failure as a father. A couple things about that. Number one, topic sentence. Your idea, whenever you arrive at one, your main idea usually is going to be in this, again, pardon the pun, ballpark. Because just like we did, you're going to think as you kind of work over this stuff, and it's going to show up toward the bottom of your paragraph. Okay. What we got to do now is try to figure out a sentence that encapsulates that idea, right? And I have a quick framework for you to work with. Who, what, and then how or why. Some notes about that. Who and what, this is just the subject and what that subject is doing. This is how we build sentences in English. That's how sentences work. The shortest sentence in the Bible, Jesus wept. That's a sentence. Because you have a subject, and that subject's doing something. Okay? If you only give me that, though, especially in a topic sentence, you're not giving me an argument, because that will be summary. This is us pointing to something in the poem, and this is us saying what that something is doing. And that's it. We can all do that. How or why is a little more difficult. How does this tie into your larger argument, if you already have one? Or, why do I care? Why are you telling me at all? That's an argument that comes from here. All right? So, let's start simple. What is our subject in this paragraph, and what is our subject doing? There's different ways to interpret that. You'll see.
Honestly, the subject is the dog, crack dog.
Maybe. Why do you say that?
It's because that indicates the person that the father is.
Okay. Well, but that's not strictly in the poem. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of the beginning of our argument. So, what seems to be our subject then? Like, what do we end up talking about by the end? The pitcher. We end up talking about him. We kind of start with the Dodge, and it seemed like maybe it was our focus at the beginning, but at the end, we're actually using it to get to him, it seems like. Which, again, to be fair, we care more about anyway. I mean, we don't give a shit about his truck, right? So, what is the picture? What is the pitcher doing in these lines? And I say there's different ways to talk about that because the pitcher isn't really doing anything. What are we saying about him? What are we looking at about him?
He sucks.
In the lines. Hold on. He sucks. Jesus. I think he's just a guy trying to get through his life, man. I don't. What are we pointing to about the pitcher? The fact that,
He just doesn't give a shit.
well, beyond that,
His life is kind of crusty.
his what?
His life is kind of crusty.
Okay, more specific than that. What about his life? Do you guys, is that a thing, crusty? Okay, because I don't know. Anyway, what about his life in particular is that?
His home life.
Well, but his,
His inability to provide.
no, so
Purpose.
you guys are thinking way too next level. We're literally just,
Family?
what?
His family?
But,
His broken dollars.
yes. Because again, all we're doing in the first two is something from the poem. Here's a thing I'm looking at and what that thing is doing. That's all we're doing to begin with, okay? The next part, that's when you guys can get next level and try to give me that argument. But you got to point to something first. So, something like, I don't know. We would have to edit a lot of this. I just want to say that. All right, so lamenting the state of the pitcher's truck. Or, how about this? Hell. What? Now, what are we saying about that truck? The fact that it's broken down, we kind of arrived at what?
He's a failure.
Yeah, but like, how do we get there from the truck?
He's lost his sense of utility as a dad.
Okay. God, you guys are really bumming me out all this stuff. So, yeah. we used underscore yet?
Yes.
We have? Shit. We said highlights? Probably. We said illustrates.
No, portrays.
No, you guys all, displays and portrays, you guys always use it, like, that would not work here. That's incorrect.
We haven't used highlights.
We have? Oh, sweet. Sad to say the picture struck highlights.
Uselessness.
Yeah. Something like that. And again, we started with evidence. We just worked on that evidence. We worked through details until we came to an actual, like, solid claim. And this is what's important. It's a claim we care about. I'm not saying we couldn't appreciate how hard this guy's life must be and the fact that the Dodge being broken makes that harder. But at the end of the day, it has to be, the question you have to answer is, what am I learning about the world this guy is from? Now, the fact that we look at his Dodge and kind of take that to mean he's not the best dad in this moment, on its own might not tell us a lot, but I think you can use that to look at the bigger picture, right? We have some bigger, we only have one. We didn't have time for other ones. But if the question at the end of this poem is, this group of guys, specifically the picture, right, it brings him up again. We kind of find out he's the one telling the story. This group of guys is made to face that gap between talent and genius. I'll put it to you this way. Mantle gets to leave Oklahoma, right? These men do not. And that's pretty clear. Why? Why does Mantle get to leave, do you think? Like, he's better at baseball.
He's the next level. He's better than just average Joe.
He's more talented. Did he have to work for that?
Yes.
Probably.
Sure. Did he have to work more than they did?
Probably not, because he's younger.
He's 15. I'm not saying he doesn't, like, play baseball all the time, right? I'm not saying he's lazy. I'm not saying any of that. But these guys have been playing for a lot longer. Plus, they're grown-ass men, right? It basically says it at the beginning. Like, they should be more physically capable in some ways. Like, it's just... But he is naturally gifted. We have that term. Gifted. It's given to him biologically. Nothing they can do about that gap. So he has more opportunity than they do, naturally. And they're kind of made to face that. And they don't like it. So what I would put to you, I think the road we're heading down with this particular paragraph could take that on in some way, right? Maybe being a disabled father is basically what we're saying. Ties into that in some way. It's the same reason they don't walk him. If they walk him, they probably win the game, it tells you at the end of the poem. But they don't. Why?
Because Mantle won.
Well, yeah, but if they walk him, they would have won. Why don't they walk him?
He makes him feel masculine.
Why?
Because he's better at the game.
So to walk him would be to admit what? That he's better. So you at least, if you go down without admitting defeat, you somehow maintain that masculinity. The speaker says a ragged remnant of themselves they can take home, not walking him, right? It also says this. I can't talk about this poem and not give you my favorite lines from the poem. Real quick. He gives you several reasons toward the end of the poem for why they don't walk him. This is the last one. And they did not because they had gone through a depression and a war that had left them with the idea that being a man in the eyes of their fathers and everyone else had cost them just too goddamn much to lay it at the feet of a 15-year-old boy. So yeah, masculinity is definitely a concern. But that's something to think about too. There's all kinds of ways to talk about these different poems. I mean that. But even with what we talked about today, that one paragraph we laid out, you would do that a few times to build a paper, right? It can head different directions. You have all kinds of possibilities. But that one paragraph that we did today, and I'm going to send to you guys, is about the pitcher being somehow disabled, right, as a father. And we talked about why, obviously. But if by the end of the poem it's trying to say the bigger concern is like how they define themselves as men or whatever that is, and then it lumps that in with opportunity and like not having the same as other men, as like Mickey Mantle, I think there's a way to talk about that alongside this pitcher, not wanting to think about, not giving a shit anyway, his own disability. To sum all that up, if you think you're a shitty dad, what kind of opinion do you have of yourself as a man, too?
You're a shitty man.
Not
Probably
really.
the same.
Probably pretty similar, right? But now what do you do with the fact when you meet a guy who, according to some other standard, is way manlier than you, at 15, didn't have to work for it, got it naturally? What kind of world are you living in?
Pretty crappy.
Pretty unfair. But the bigger question is why? And that's a thesis. In like 10 minutes just there, we went through a whole paper. So if you didn't follow all of it, it's fine. I'm just telling you, that's basically what we just did.